Hey, before I kick off the podcast, I just want to shout out Next Door Clothing. Next Door, a clothing brand based out of Bondi in Sydney. They're making really nice jeans and shirts and hats. So go and check out their full range at nextdoorsydney.com. They're also artists, so you can go and check out a range of art. They put on rad parties, and I love what they're doing. So nextdoorsydney.com for the full range.
I'm having a good time.
You are?
Yeah.
I can tell.
We are rolling.
Terrible Happy Talks. Terrible Happy Talks. Terrible Happy Talks. Terrible Happy Talks. Today's guest is Charlie Hill Smith. Charlie is a husband, father, writer, director, documentary filmmaker, comedian, and humanitarian. Charlie received critical acclaim as the writer and director of multi-AFI nominated award-winning documentary Strange Birds in Paradise, a documentary about the genocide occurring in West Papua, Indonesia. In 2005, Charlie was the cinematographer on the Australian television company SBS channel. He was the documentary making of Ten Canoes. He also wrote and directed Indonesia, Art, Activism and Rock and Roll for SBS. He wrote the sketch comedy pilot Red Monkey for the Australian Broadcasting Company. He wrote and directed Wok-About West Papua, the precursor to his documentary Strange Birds in Paradise. And he directed a documentary for the company Sony New York on the Ben Folds 5 Australian tour. And the list goes on. His resume is stacked and he works very hard. In 1997, Charlie wrote and directed the documentary Hong Kong Phooey and the Great Chinese Takeaway, which is becoming relevant once again given the current political climate and uprising occurring in Hong Kong as we speak. Like I said, his resume in the independent film industry is vast and in-depth. His work is purposeful, profound, diverse, with human rights at its core. Charlie's work raises awareness, it challenges adversity, it challenges societal norms, and it has fun along the way. Born in the Barossa Valley, South Australia, dividing his time between Australia and Bali, Charlie is with me today to discuss his journey, experiences, challenges, and hopes for the future. Charlie Hill Smith, welcome.
Hello, Shannon. How are you?
How are you, brother?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you.
I say this to a few of my guests, like, I've just got this thing, I've got to do the intro in one take. I stumbled a little bit, but got there in the end.
Sounded good.
Thanks, brother. So how's your morning been?
It's been great. I've just come up on a scooter from Canggu down on the coast in Bali up into the forest here in Sibang where the green school is, and we're sitting in a beautiful bamboo house looking out over the ravine. It's all green and lush, and the temperature is very comfortable.
It is a good temperature.
Yeah.
How do you enjoy that contrast between like hipster capital of the world, Canggu, and then coming into the jungle of, Sabang Kaja Abiansamo?
Yeah, well, that's Bali, isn't it? It really is a great prism of Eastern and Western culture. It's all happening here. And yeah, Canggu down on the coast there, it's all hipster heaven with organic coffee and tattoo parlours wall to wall. But up here it's the kampong and the village and Balinese culture. It's a great diverse place.
It is, and I think the diversity never ceases to amaze me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's day to day. Like you see the full spectrum, don't you?
Sure do.
So you've really immersed yourself in Indonesian culture throughout your life. Why settle in? Why are you settling in Bali at the moment? What's the motivation there?
Well, we've come to this amazing school called the Green School, which is an international private school up in the forest here. And I've been travelling to Indonesia for 30 years. I was an exchange student as a pimply 18-year-old in Java, Central Java, and I lived there with a Javanese family who are still my Javanese family, and so my kids who are still quite young in primary school have Javanese grandparents. So I have a long and strong love affair with Indonesia, and when we got the chance to come over here for a couple of years and bring my kids and my partner into this cross-cultural space, we jumped at it. And so we're here for a couple of years. The kids are learning Indonesian. They're learning a bit of Balinese culture. It's it's a wonderful time to be here with them, and it's a great experience.
Do you get the opportunity often to go and visit your Indonesian family while you're here because it's more convenient?
Yeah. We go a couple of times a year, head over there to Semarang in Central Java, and it's a very different scenario in Java. Java's very much the heartland of the Indonesian Republic. Bali is a very important part of the mosaic, but Bali is a very cross-cultural space these days.
Yeah. Do you find there's more like abject poverty in Java compared to Bali?
Well, Bali's the richest province in the Republic, and that has a lot to do with the tourist industry. Java's a very complicated and crowded place. It has the highest sort of per capita population of any place on Earth, which is pretty wild coming from Australia, where we have one of the lowest population densities on Earth. Java's a very confronting place, and everything is in your face there. The struggles with poverty, with mental illness, with the movement from sort of country to city, with pollution. All of these things are really up front in Java.
So mental illness is quite prominent in Java.
Well, it's
Are
just
we talking anxiety, depression, or?
Yeah, no, I'm just because the sort of the safety net, the social safety net that is very, very strong. I mean, Indonesia doesn't have a particularly strong sort of social services economy or industry, and so a lot of people are on the street, and so you'll just see orang gila. So-called crazy people. On the street, walking around naked, or squatting down in a sewer, or living under a bridge because they haven't got facilities to deal with those sort of the terrible social problems.
Yeah, and I think that's a real fundamental marker between a developed country and a developing country is how the most vulnerable are supported. And I feel like that's a real definitive marker. Yeah,
it is. Even a developed country like Australia struggles with it.
Definitely.
Back in the Kennett years in Victoria, they closed a lot of the institutions that looked after people with mental illness, and they just put them on the streets. They shipped them out to sort of housing projects in the suburbs with no facilities, no budgets, no anything. And these people were just sort of set loose, and so we still struggle with it. It's not something that is just the realm of the developing world. It's very much a problem for everybody.
It is. It really is. Now, Charlie, mate, I can't contain myself. I really want to talk to you about Hong Kong. Would you be interested in talking about that? Yeah.
Well, look,
maybe just a little bit. Whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, no, absolutely comfortable with it. I'm hoping that you'll humour me today, because I've sort of prepared something that is a bit of a journey. You asked me to come and talk about, I guess, my sort of adult life and what sort of led me to where I am here and into documentary making. Because I came from a very different place. I didn't I didn't study film. I sort of began as an artist, a cartoonist, and an actor, and a comedian, and I slowly navigated my way towards filmmaking. But I think Hong Kong is at the start of that. And so what I thought I'd do, if you would humour me today, is here we are in Indonesia, the fourth largest country on earth, and one of the great post-colonial new countries on earth. Indonesia became a republic in about 1947, and for 300 and odd years before that, it was a Dutch colony. And the Dutch came here, and the Dutch turned the place into a giant coffee and spice plantation, and they grew rich on the back of the produce and the work of Indonesians across the archipelago, much like the English in India and Australia. My fascination for years has been the colonial experience and the post-colonial experience. So today, I thought what I'd like to do is take us on a bit of a journey that goes from colonialism all the way through to the alt-right of today and a particular red-haired Australian senator called Pauline Hanson. So if you're up for that, this will...
Mate,
this will take us a pretty strange but interesting journey, hopefully.
Mate, I am so up for it.
Excellent.
Mate, as they say in Bahasa Indonesian, silakan.
Silakan, baik. So here we are in 2019, and as you just mentioned, the Hong Kong protests have been taking place. They had 1.7 million honkies, as they call themselves, hit the streets to protest against the People's Republic of China taking over the Hong Kong legal system, I guess you'd say, amongst other things. And that would allow them to ship dissidents who'd been accused of some crime out of Hong Kong back to Beijing, where they most likely would disappear them. I have previously described my first documentary I ever made was in Hong Kong in 1997, and it was called Hong Kong Fooey and the Great Chinese Takeaway. And that particular sort of Beijing buffet, if you like, is a cold entree of shut up, followed by a main course of jailed for life, and then served with a bit of a side salad of a bullet in the back of your head. Now, clearly the honkies aren't up for that. Whatever Hong Kong was in its 99-year lease to the English, they didn't have democratic powers there, but what they did have was the English rule of law. And, that's dubious at worst and fantastic at best. But that Hong Kong legal system is still in place. And so the thought of that disappearing and the two systems, one nation policy of Beijing and Hong Kong disappearing and Beijing being able to just remove people from the territories has created this massive protest. Population of 7 million people, 1.7 million people on the streets.
Do you feel like that system was going to be flawed anyway?
Yeah, look,
from the very start.
It was inevitable.
It was, wasn't it?
It was inevitable that this time would come. In a way, it's surprising that for all of these years, from 97 until now, that it hasn't occurred sooner.
That's my next question. Are you surprised at how quick it's happened, or not quick enough?
I'm not. I'm surprised that it hasn't come to a head quicker than it did. So that's Hong Kong. That's where we find Hong Kong in 2019. Also in 2019, in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, in Australia, an Australian politician, an ex-fish and chip shop owner, turned federal government senator, a woman named Pauline Hanson.
I can see where this is going.
Yeah, she climbed, I don't know if you know this, but she climbed Australia's most famous rock, which is Uluru, this giant monolith in the middle of the country. And, that seems innocent enough, apart from the fact that Uluru is, apart from being an incredible tourist destination and one of the great known icons of Australia and Australian tourism, it is also the spiritual centre and traditional centre for the Aranda Nation, the Aranda people of Central Australia. It has been a meeting place and a spiritual heartland for the Aranda people for tens of thousands of years. And the Aranda people have always hated tourists climbing the rock because it's like their Notre Dame or their St. Paul's Cathedral. And they find it really distasteful when they find it in so many ways an affront to their culture. But they've never had any power to stop it until now. And in October, I think October 26th, they're going to stop people climbing the rock. You can still go there, walk around it, tour it, enjoy the incredible tour of just walking around this fantastic, beautiful place and hear all the great creation stories. But you're not going to be allowed to climb it anymore. So, this woman, Pauline Hanson, this senator from Queensland, who, to be honest, is a thinly disguised racist nationalist and always has been, she thought she'd showcase her pig-ignorant, rub more salt in the wounds of Aboriginal Australia and garner more attention for her particular brand of redneck, alt-right, Aussie nationalism by defying the wishes of the rightful traditional owners, the Aranda people, and climb the rock followed by a team of cameramen. cool. Woke.
I mean, I'm sorry, I'm shaking my head vigorously because it's the first time I've heard it. I've definitely disconnected from mainstream media and news of recent times. So, and it's funny, I often only hear the things that are really pertinent when you do that, and to hear that as an Australian, I just find it disgusting, and I'm astounded that after all these years, that she has maintained such a, as you described, ignorant mentality to the plight of the Aboriginal people in Australia. It makes me feel repulsed, to be honest.
I mean, it's just, it's typical behaviour for her, and the sort of the centre and alt-right and far-right in Australia, which is still a very strong part of our political and cultural and subcultural landscape, unfortunately.
Can I just ask, how did she present it? How did she justify that behaviour and that decision to climb it? Was it, I just want to do it before it's not allowed, or how was
her
she?
Justification is that she is an Indigenous Australian because she was born here. So she, after she parades herself up and down the rock with an entourage of cameramen from A Current Affair. She then goes and talks to some young Aboriginal people and some older Aboriginal people around the rock and says things like, how do you justify being the only Indigenous Australians? I'm Indigenous. I was born here. And these Aboriginal people are just looking at her blankly, not really understanding what the hell she's talking about. And their blank expressions really says it all. It just shows that she's talking past them. She's not engaging in anything. So here we have these two events. These protests in Hong Kong, this protest by this white Australian woman climbing a sacred site. I want to build a little sort of story of who I am and where I'm from using those two events. So in 1997, 20 years ago, I was a comedian, and this was in a previous life when I was doing stand-up comedy. I'd been an actor for many years, and we'd started a comedy club in Adelaide, and we were sort of building our chops and becoming comedians. And Pauline Hanson had just arrived on the stage, the political stage in Australia. She'd given her first anti-immigrant, thinly veiled, but clearly racist maiden speech in Parliament. That was entertained and, if anything, encouraged by John Howard, our the sort of the patriarch of the beginning of the alt-right in Australia, the beginning of the resurgence of white Australia and of conservative racist Australia. The godfather of the modern Australian Liberal Party, who persist with his, white Australia policies. So she'd come along. I was hanging out with these comedians. We formed a group called Comedians Against Racism, and Pauline Hanson came to Adelaide and was going to do her first speech in Adelaide. And so we formed this group, and we went down to the hall where she was speaking, and we set up on milk crates with our loudspeakers, and I performed a poem that I'd written, an ode to Pauline, and at this protest. And I'll do that poem for you now if you like, because it's an old favourite.
Oh, what a treat.
Here we go.
What a treat.
It goes like this. Herald the day, O mighty Democritus, for a new visionary walks amongst us. With views high-minded and ethically handsome, the member for Bigottsville, Pauline Hanson. Pauline, with your beautiful smile, you've redefined the boundaries of style. With your cat's bum mouth and your eyes that smoulder, you got a fish and a chip on your shoulder. Yes, Pauline, your mouth so mean. Your fish and chip shop, she looks so clean. You don't like blacks or yellows or Greeks, so why you got Roo-burgers, dimmies and crab sticks? Pauline, you're so enlightened. Our system you have heightened. You're so well-dressed, well-versed, well-trained. Xenophobia? Please explain. Yes, Pauline, you're heaven-sent. Lucky those you represent. Can we join your New Age faction? Let's all vote in national action. Pauline's a winner, a shaker and mover. Pauline's pushing the ethnic hoover. She's cleaning house, this multicultural failure. She's bringing back shiny white Australia. So you shut your ignorant, racist mouth. You're embarrassing our island in the south. Your voice is weak, shallow and shrill. Give up politics, get back on the grill. So anyway, I was... cheers.
Amazing.
I was standing on a milk crate, surrounded by a group of comedians, and doing this poem through a bullhorn, and suddenly a group of far-right skinhead national action dudes, who are basically Australian Nazis, attacked us and came at a classic pincer movement from two sides. All my comedian mates sort of buffered them off. We got sort of pushed off our milk crates. There was a whole hullabaloo. Then we reformed and I got to finish the poem. And then about a week later, I went on Hey Hey It's Saturday, which is an Australian live TV show, and they always had a space for sort of comedians and stuff.
Really iconic Australia.
It was. And it was live, live TV. And they told me, you can't do that poem. You can't do any of that politics stuff that you did at the audition, but you can do the other stuff, which was all sort of soft comedy. But because it was live and I didn't really give a shit about Channel 9's rules, I did that poem. I did the Pauline Hanson poem.
Wow.
And they were outraged. And as soon as I finished, I came second in the contest and was beaten by a 92-year-old lady who sung You Are My Sunshine, which is a pretty hard act to follow.
Wow.
But as soon as I finished, they bloody swooped me up, kicked me off the premises, escorted me to the gate with a couple of huge security dudes and threw me into the night.
No way.
But I got the poem out. It went around the country. So that was 1997, and that was the year that I made my first documentary.
Right.
And that was Hong Kong Phooey and the Great Chinese Takeaway. And the reason I made that film is because it seemed to me that handing of Hong Kong from the British to the Chinese was emblematic of the end of an old colonial era and the beginning of a new epoch, a post-colonial, neo-colonial time. The rise of China, this great authoritarian state. No democracy, no regard for human rights. Very much a colonial power within its own framework. The Han Chinese between the Yellow and the Yangtze rivers. And it's a Han colony with a series of small groups of people living around the Han Chinese who've been pulled into this giant new country called China. So around China, you've got the Manchurians, the Mongolians, the Uyghur, the Tibetans, and then the Dong, the Song, and the Hmong down near Vietnam. Now, these are all minority groups who are under the control of the Han Chinese. And they hate the Han Chinese and they feel repressed. And there's constant rebellion happening in Tibet and out in Xinjiang and in Mongolia and so on. We don't hear about it because of the controlled press of China. But this is a new colonial power. And since then, they've pushed their way out into the Pacific and taken up the slack and the space left by the retraction of America under Trump. And so we see the rise of this new great power. So I went and made this film, Hong Kong Phooey and the Great Chinese Takeaway, which you can see on my YouTube channel. And it just asks the question, what is China? Who is China? And it's my first film. It's kind of naive. It's kind of a bit sort of clunky. It's a little obvious. But I stand by the research and I stand by the conclusions of the film, even now, 20 years later. And in fact, I ask at the end of the film, how long will Hong Kong's sweet life last? As long as heaven and nature allow it, or as long as Beijing lets it? And clearly what we're seeing now is Beijing clamping down and trying to remove those the freedoms, some of the freedoms that Hong Kong still possesses.
Just to jump in a little bit there, it's the first time I've ever heard a comparison drawn between China and the British Empire. Yeah. And I was just sort of thinking about what you're saying, and it's for me, who grew up in colonial Australia, a British part of the British Empire, maybe I've never thought of it as being so controlled. Like, I always just see China as this separate communist entity that
Yeah.
we're nothing like. I've never had any experience with that, but maybe I have.
It's a new colonial power, and they are spreading their wings, and their soft and hard diplomacy, their investment in the Pacific nations, their investment in African nations, their investment right across the world. They give loans to countries all over the world, some of them predatory, and if the country can't pay them back, they'll set up a naval base. Sri Lanka, in Africa, Vanuatu. So yeah, it's the rise, very much the rise of a new colonial experience, and they are the largest country on earth, and they'll be the largest economy on earth by the time we end this podcast, I reckon.
On a scale much bigger than the British Empire ever was?
Very different. Very different, yeah. The British Empire was enormous. The largest empire in the history of the world was Chinese. It was Genghis Khan. And the Khans, who were Mongolian, who then moved to Beijing and became Han, took on all the trappings of the Han, but they were Mongols. That Mongol empire stretched all the way. They took all of Russia. They went to the gates of Vienna. That was the largest empire in the history of the world in terms of land, and that was Mongol Chinese,
How interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I kind of feel that activism is at your core. Would you agree with that statement?
I'm fascinated by history and the colonial experience, and I guess a sort of a cross-cultural experience. Those aspects, those topics, I guess, are my real passion.
Okay.
So here we have these juxtapositions. We have Hong Kong today, Hong Kong in 1997. We have Pauline Hanson today, Pauline Hanson in 1997. So you're probably asking, how does any of that connect to colonialism? Well, that's clear. But what I want to talk about is the link between colonialism and fascism, because I feel that we're moving into a new age of cloaked and overt fascism around the world. So in 1930, we have the rise of fascism in Europe, in Italy, and in Germany in particular. Then we have the Second World War. Clearly a disaster by anyone's account.
Would you mind just giving our listeners a brief definition of fascism?
It's very hard to define, but what I would suggest to anybody who wants to look into fascism is to read an amazing essay by Umberto Eco, incredible Italian novelist and philosopher. And Eco grew up under Mussolini. He was a child under Mussolini. So he wrote an essay in 1995 called Eternal Fascism. Go online and read his description of fascism. He's much more qualified to define it. Fascism is it's ultimately militaristic. It believes that a man with a gun is more important than discussion. It doesn't like complexity, pluralism. It feels that discussion is unmanly.
Okay.
It doesn't like women. It doesn't like the maternal. It breeds in spaces where the plural and the complicated have been repressed. For example, it hates anything to do with homosexuality. It hates anything that is complicated and not obvious. But I would say read Umberto Eco, and Eco will give you an incredible definition of fascism.
Great. No, that's enlightening as it is.
And so, we see in Germany, what occurs when a fascist party is allowed to take power, and that led to mass murder, to the Holocaust, and I guess all of us can agree that didn't go well. for anybody.
No.
Yeah, it wasn't very cool. So out of that 1940s post-war chaos came this amazing post-colonial movement called the Poets of Negritude, which is a great title. Poets of Negritude, I just love it. And that really came from a group of black writers who had grown up in colonial situations, particularly French colonial situations. And out of Martinique, one of the islands in the Caribbean, came Aimé Césaire. And Césaire was this incredible intellectual, this giant brain box on legs who had been educated at the Sorbonne in Paris. And he and a group of other black intellectuals in Paris formed the so-called Poets of Negritude. And that's an incredible group of guys. And his wife, Suzanne Césaire, was a leading intellectual of the time. They formed an amazing newspaper called Tropique. And through this, they created this discussion about what colonialism is and was and what a post-colonial future might look like. So people like Frantz Fanon, Albert Memmi, Senghor and Dumas, these men and women created the beginning of this discussion. And that led to the likes of Gandhi, to Martin Luther King Jr., to Malcolm X, to Mandela, to James Baldwin, to the great Ta-Nehisi Coates, now in America. And his incredible book, I'd recommend anybody to read his book, Between the World and Me, which is a searing analysis of the so-called American dream and of being white. What is whiteness? And all of that led to black American struggle music, from the blues to hip-hop. And at the same time, I guess from our experience as Australians, we were moving out of, from post-war Australia into the 1950s, we were moving out of our own colonial situation. Australia was not peacefully settled. It was embroiled in violent frontier wars right across the whole country. Mass murder, dispossession, rape, internment, where black Australians were pulled off their land and stuck into missions.
Segregated.
Yeah, absolutely segregated. All over the country, ripped off their country and put into these missions. And then in 1901, we became a federation. We became a country. And that the first capital was in Melbourne. And the only piece of business, all of those states who came together to be the new Australia, the only piece of business they could agree on was the White Australia policy.
I can't believe you said that, because my next question was, do you think Australia ever recovered from the White Australia policy of the 50s?
We are dragging our way out of that sorry state, but this is a crippling event. So they get together in 1901. They can't agree on what railway gauge to use. So there's like 5 different railway gauges in Australia. And you used to have to change the trains you used every time you went from state to state. You have to move one load off one train onto a different train because we couldn't agree on anything. But in 1901 we got together and what we could agree on was, and the first piece of business put through the Parliament of Australia was the Immigration Restriction Act, which was the White Australia policy. And this was a piece of social engineering that stayed in place until really 1975. They removed the last pieces of it. And it worked a treat. So by 1960, we were the whitest place on earth.
I hear that and it's just astounding. I mean, you hear stories of customs officials, if you weren't, I think in the policy, if you weren't of white Aryan race or white Aryan appearance, you were turned away at the border.
Absolutely right.
It's just so archaic. I just can't get my head around it.
South Africa came to us to build their apartheid policy. It came from Australia. We had implemented the White Australia policy in 1901, and that social engineering political policy drove out anybody who wasn't, as you described, a white Northern European. So it's been a long slog for us. In the 1960s, there was an explosion of global consciousness around the world. This incredible eruption of free love and human rights consciousness. and it spread around the world, and thank Christ it came to Australia as well. And in 1966, there was a very famous event called the Wave Hill Walkout that occurred on a cattle property in the Northern Territory, where the Aboriginal people there, they went on strike. And this was unheard of. And that was kind of the beginning of our march towards human rights. And obviously I'm skipping over a whole bunch of labour movement history, which was really the building of the backbone of egalitarianism in Australia. But this black strike on this cattle property began what developed into the dismantling of the White Australia policy. The new Australia, multicultural Australia, where we encouraged refugees, we encouraged Aboriginal rights, land rights, political power for minorities. And like in all these great struggles, struggle music and struggle art, the artists were a part of that. And bands like Us Mob and Wrong Side of the Road, which led to the Rumpy Band, which led to Yotha Yindi, which led to Archie Roach, which led to modern Australian music. You know, this struggle from nothing, from destitution to land rights to recognition, and we're still struggling. We're still on that road. And this is the formation of a modern Australia that our contemporary right-wing politicians and commentators are fighting against. But it is the heart and soul of Australia. You know, we are a black nation. It is an Aboriginal nation that is now a multicultural nation. And if we don't recognise that, then we will be interned in this sarcophagus of hate and ongoing strife that we simply won't escape. So, you know, while this sort of eloquence and this genius and political struggle was lighting the way in post-war Europe and post-war America and post-war Australia, what do you reckon the Nazis were up to?
Doing what they did.
We'd kind of smashed them, you know. We'd smashed the Italians, we'd smashed the German Nazis, we'd smashed the fascist Japanese. But they didn't go away. You know, lo and behold, in the shadows. So let's look at the USA, post-war USA. In 1959, a guy called George Lincoln Rockwell formed the American Nazi Party. And he sort of had all the tropes of old Nazism. He had the swastikas, they had the sort of the brown shirts, these guys had sort of grey shirts. And they tried to sort of pull in that sort of the old iconography, the old sort of cultural tropes of old school European Nazism. But the Americans weren't going for it. They'd just come out of fighting the Nazis, and all the, you know, the so-called greatest generation was settling back into a normal life. So they saw these jokers and took them as jokers and laughed at them, basically. So the Nazis had to change. They had to change their image. They had to get savvy. And this was the age of the explosion of American advertising, of PR, of Mad Men, you know, the great TV show Mad Men. So this is American PR. It's exploding across the country. So the Nazis, like any organisation, got heavily into PR. So by 1974, you've got a guy called William Pierce on the scene. He formed a group called the National Alliance. And in 1978, he wrote a book called The Turner Diaries. I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
Excuse my ignorance.
This monumental piece of disgusting fiction. It's kind of it's a fictitious, sort of slightly sort of sci-fi book about a race war where hordes of sort of like raping zombie-like blacks try to conquer America, but then the pushback comes from the clean white races of America, who then purge the entire globe of all the non-white races. Gotcha. So this book, The Turner Diaries, this disgusting thing, which you just think would be forgotten because it was, you know, so poorly written and such a sort of loathsome narrative, was the beginning of modern fascism in America, and it got picked up by all of these and sort of inspired and fueled and red-pilled.
And inspired a new movement.
Absolutely. And it inspired people like David Duke, who became a governor, and Duke sort of dragged the KKK. Duke was the so-called, he was one of the grand wizards of the KKK. And he sort of dragged the KKK from being a really just kind of a laughable group of hooded freaks, which they were before the First War. But then between the First War and the Second War, they really got their act together, and the KKK sort of gained a lot of political and financial strength, and they murdered and lynched a lot of people in the South. But they'd sort of fallen away. The rise of fascism in Europe, the Second World War, had painted them in a poor light. But David Duke, red-pilled by the Turner Diaries, started to reinvent the new fascism in America, a new message of the far right, whereby if you play nice, if you cloak yourself in free speech, in libertarianism, in gun rights, these other issues, you can gain respectability and you can co-opt the centre and the far right, and this is what we're seeing happening today. So then that leads to Christian identity, which is a racist, anti-Semitic, sort of white supremacist interpretation of Christianity, which got big and is really, it seeps its tentacles through all the modern far right and alt-right in America. And it led to guys like Pat Buchanan. And Pat Buchanan, he was a Nixon, Reagan worm who then ran for president about 3 or 4 times.
This is through the 80s?
Yeah, he ran for president so he starts in the 60s and goes into the 80s with Reagan. Then in 92, 96 and 2000 he runs for president. And he gets a lot of support. And this guy is a far-right, racist, white supremacist. He doesn't use the language of the KKK or of a Nazi. He cloaks it in this new...
Christianity?
Yeah, he cloaks it in... Just like the Christians co-opt gamers to become young Christians, so he does the same sort of thing. He becomes a regular on Fox News. He terms he coins the phrase silent majority, talking about white people. He is anti-immigration, and he is very much a Christian identity guy. Then we have the internet exploding in when was that?
90s.
Yeah.
That would have been, early 90s, but I didn't really come... I think it was more like the early 2000s where it really started to really take off, because then it was the logistics and the technicalities of it were getting more efficient.
And I think with the internet is when fascism really regains its feet.
Because of the ability to share information globally.
Totally.
And to a vast population of people so immediately.
And to take people who are kind of lonely, spotty dudes wanking in the dark and connect them.
Yeah.
To connect all of these lonely wankers to form organisations, to create what they feel is a brotherhood, what they feel is an organisation, and then within a because we are group organisms.
And with cowardice, in my opinion, because they haven't had to be on the front line, and like you said, they can sit in their dark room by themselves and voice these opinions behind a screen, without having to actually face the emotion or the possible conflict that would occur otherwise in a different setting. Exactly. Like what people would have to do. If you wanted to voice those, you'd have to do it in a public forum and face the repercussions if they happened. You know,
that's exactly right. So so what that led to in America was that the far right that could only bring 20 or 80 guys onto a street for a protest, and there'd be 400 anti-Nazi protesters against them in the 70s and 80s and in the 90s. Now they could organise thousands and tens and thousands online and build, and using this cloaked language of gun rights, of libertarianism, of anti-immigration, of
democracy,
and the economy and the silent majority. They could build these coalitions, and that's exactly what happened. And what we see from that is the rise of a whole bunch of new American fascists, people like Matthew Heimbach, Richard Spencer, Jason Kessler, Gavin McInnes. These guys formed a whole bunch of new groups like Vanguard America, the Patriot Front, League of the South, the Proud Boys, and they start to pull the right further to the right, always disguising their speech and building these coalitions. So the rise of the far right, the politics, and this occurs all over the world. And we see that slowly the rise of these new far-right parties in Europe, in Asia, in South America, in Australia, through the late 80s, but in the 90s and the 2000s, with the power of the internet, we see this new rise of the new right. And so, for example, as Trump ran for the election in 2016, these groups in America felt emboldened by his overt, cloaked language, and they stepped out of the shadows onto the street. And Trump's words and actions bring the Christian right and the alt-right and the far-right all together under one umbrella. And then we saw that explode in the so-called Unite the Right movements in America, the big gatherings of all of these different disparate far-right groups. These groups came together, and that led to Charlottesville a few years ago.
There you go. Okay.
And Charlottesville was where a young woman was murdered by a Nazi in a car. The Nazis were openly marching with torches, saying Jews will not replace us. And then what did the American president do? He responded by saying that there were very good people on both sides. He legitimized the right for the first time in America by an American president, well, since the 1800s, when American presidents were members of the Klan, but certainly since the Second World War. And so he brings it into the centre. From that, with that language, that exact language that Trump had used, we get this gobbledygook manifesto from this Australian living in New Zealand who then commits the Christchurch massacre. It's heinous crime. It's terrible hate crime, using the exact words that the President of the United States is spouting. Then we have El Paso, Texas, and Dayton, Ohio, just a few weeks ago. They use the exact words. They put out these moronic manifestos through 8chan and other online sort of far-right talk groups. And so that's that rise. And so where do we find ourselves now?
Confused.
Yeah.
Scared. I'm just voicing my feelings.
Yeah.
I do. I feel confused and scared. A question for you. Do you feel that countries such as, westernized countries such as Australia and America have as much democracy as we are led to believe? How's that for a loaded question? What's your opinion?
No, we don't.
Why?
You know, we elect a government once every 4 years, and then we take our hands off the wheel. And the truth is, if you don't get on the streets, if you don't organise and struggle, then very powerful forces will rip away from you whatever freedoms, whatever rights you have. And we've seen this over and over again. So, and just getting online and voicing your opinion with a click or joining a group and not being involved is not enough. You actually need to get on the streets. You actually need to organise groups, and you need to be physical about it. You need to. Yes, it's important and to use the internet to organise, but you need to rock up. You need to be there in person. Otherwise, no one's going to listen to you.
So you need to be militant to an extent.
You need to be active. You've got to be active, you know.
Which is what's happening in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
I mean,
1.7 million out of 7 million.
2 million, almost 2 million people.
Yeah. They're
actively turning up
with their asses.
Yeah. And when you see extreme force being used by the military that has been deployed there to manage those protests, for me, that seems like the very first sign, an erosion of democracy. And that's the obvious analysis, I think. And when I watch the media around that and see violence towards peaceful protesters, or what they seem peaceful, and from what I hear, when you have that many people, there is going to be a small percentage who are not being peaceful. There's always going to be an element of extremism. And that's where I feel a little bit helpless, because then that gets very much taints the peacefulness of...
It does, but you can't let that, and there'll always be a small element of that, but you can't let that stop you being active. You need to discuss that. You need to air all of that and trust that people are grown-ups and they can see the truth for themselves. And we find ourselves in very polarised times. But we have much more in common than we do apart. So, if you'd humour me here, I'd like to sort of diverge slightly,
mate. Please,
and draw a link between the colonial and the fascist. So I talked about the poets of negritude.
Mm-hmm.
Césaire, this amazing Martinique activist who comes out of the Caribbean and out of France after the war. He wrote this amazing book called A Discourse on Colonialism. And I'd just like to talk about that book a little bit here. And I want to quote some little bits. I've got them here. I've got a couple of quotes here from Aimé Césaire's Discourse on Colonialism, which I think was released in the mid-50s, so maybe 55, 56. He says this. He says, to answer clearly the innocent first question, what fundamentally is colonization? To agree on what it is not, neither evangelization, nor a philanthropic enterprise, nor a desire to push back the frontiers of ignorance, nor disease. It is not a fight against tyranny, nor a project undertaken for the greater glory of God, nor an attempt to extend the rule of law. I'm talking about societies that have been drained of their essence, their cultures trampled underfoot, institutions undermined, lands confiscated, religions smashed, magnificent artistic creations destroyed, extraordinary possibilities wiped out. I'm talking about millions of men in whom fear has been cunningly instilled, who have been taught to have an inferiority complex, to tremble, to kneel in despair and behave like flunkies. And then he says this, and this is where it connects. Cruelty, mendacity, baseness and corruption have sunk deep into the soul of the European bourgeoisie, the European middle classes.
Yes.
He says, first, we must study how colonization works to de-civilize the colonizer, to brutalize him, in the true sense of the word, to degrade him, to awaken in him buried instincts, covetousness, violence, race hatred, and moral relativism. A poison, he says, a poison has been distilled into the veins of Europe, and slowly but surely the continent proceeds towards savagery. He says people are surprised. They become indignant. They say, how strange, but never mind, it's Nazism, it will pass. But the chickens of colonial violence and tyranny have come home to roost while the white working classes look on in silent complicity. So he's starting to draw a link here between the practice of the Europeans all over the world of savagery against the black and Asian races and the rise and creation of fascism and Nazism in Europe. A guy called Robin Kelly wrote a beautiful introduction to one of Césaire's editions of Discourse to Colonialism. And Kelly says that Césaire demonstrates how colonialism works to de-civilize the colonizer. Torture, violence, race hatred, and immorality constitute a dead weight on the so-called civilized, pulling the master class deeper and deeper into the abyss of barbarism. Kelly goes on, I want to suggest that this essay, Discourse on Colonialism, made some critical contributions to our thinking about colonialism, fascism, and revolution. First, its recasting of the history of Western civilization helps us locate the origins of fascism within colonization and colonialism itself. He says, discourse, this book, goes one step further by drawing a direct line between the logic of colonialism and the rise of fascism. Césaire provocatively points out that Europeans tolerated Nazism before it was inflicted on them, that they absolved it, shut their eyes to it, legitimized it, because until then it had been only applied to non-European peoples, and that the Europeans cultivated that Nazism, that they were responsible for it, and that before engulfing the whole edifice of Western Christian civilization in its wrath, that it reddened the waters, that it oozed and seeped and trickled into every crack of Europe.
Do you think that was complacency? That whole see no evil, hear no evil, it's not impacting on me, so I'm just going to be a bystander.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is what that was insidious in its own way.
He's going further than that. He's saying that there is a complicity in the middle classes to the rise of fascism. He's saying that by taking your hands off the wheel of the colonial experience or the imperial experience, or allowing these politicians to do that, by not standing up, getting on the streets and organising, that you're complicit.
Do you see that today in our society?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And how does it make you feel?
Well, I think we should all be worried. I don't think that Trump is an aberration at all. I don't see him as just a Johnny-come-lately, but I see the way that the right in America and the right in Australia have swung back to this cloaked language of anti-immigrant, anti-immigration, demonising of people who are not white, this cloaked language of libertarianism is the seed of a new fascism. Let's look at where we find ourselves right now. France has got Marie Le Pen. Hungary's got Orban. Turkey's got Uridan. The Philippines have got Duterte. Flat out mass murderer. UK's had Brexit, just got Boris Johnson. Russia's got Putin, bare-chested, horse-riding psycho. China's got Xi. Australia's got, we had John Howard, Tony Abbott, now we've got Scott Morrison. And the USA's got Fat Donny.
I'm laughing just because it's just when you put it like I can't help laughing, but when you put it like that, it's astounding. Do you feel that pattern has emerged out of fear-based promotion and mass media that pushes a fear agenda?
Yeah, there's no doubt. Fear's
Do you think that
much
is
easier
to subdue
pill.
the masses?
Yeah, it's a much easier pill to sell, and it sells newspapers. If it bleeds, it leads. And fear is the easiest political tonic. It's the easiest political strategy.
And it gets views.
It gets views, mate. It gets clicks. And when John Howard stopped the tamper back in that election that he was going to lose back in the 90s to hang on to power, the early 2000s, he played that race card. He played that white Australia card. He fueled those fears of immigration waves. The hordes from the north, the yellow peril.
Stopping the boats.
He started this resurgence, and governments, both left and right, have moved to the right to embrace that fear message. And the left in Australia have failed to convey a convincing argument against it because they're terrified of losing power. They're terrified of that. They think that people who have been drawn into fear will live in fear and cannot be swayed by the Enlightenment, cannot be swayed by the light, cannot be swayed by cohesive arguments about the fact that is just fear, that is fear-mongering, that is based on a fascist principle of us and them.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Of all of these terrible messages of the new right. And so we find all of these new leaders, they're all dressed up like centrist politicians, but within the core of their message, there's a colonial, nationalist, far-right, even outright racist message and tendencies. And all of those leaders I just mentioned apart from Xi, obviously, and Putin, who are just outright military autocrats, the rest of them have gained power through the electoral box, through elections, by using this co-opting of the centre, the right, and the far right using fear and using this cloaked language to gain power. And now, in Australia, we see this far-right politician, Pauline Hanson. She climbs Uluru to rile up her base, to rub black Australians' face in their powerlessness, overtly, and is celebrated by a large part of the commentariat.
To draw attention and gain publicity.
Absolutely. To strengthen her brand.
And exactly. Strengthen the brand and stir all that back to the surface. How do you feel about 4-year government terms?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because long-term planning is key to survival, environmentalism, social planning, infrastructure. And the Chinese have that in spades. They can afford to do long-term planning because they've got, the glorious leader for life type deal. Then again, you want swings and roundabouts because you don't want these jokers in power too long, because power corrupts. There's been studies in the last few years that show that the parts of the brain that are affected by people who are in power, and it diminishes their capacity to empathise. They do it with MRI scans. It's a fascinating area. Yeah, and it shows it. And the old expression that ultimate power corrupts ultimately. Mm-hmm. Well, this sort of brain chemistry science sort of shows that leaders who are in power for a long time have less empathy because of their sense of self.
They've become desensitized, maybe?
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'd like to... I mentioned earlier, you asked me about the definition of fascism. I'm not the best person to give you that, but there is one little thing I'd like to read to you from Umberto Eco.
Please do.
And this is from that great essay that I talked about that he released in 1995. The essay is called Eternal Fascism. And Eco has written these incredible novels over the years, and he wrote The Name of the Rose.
Okay.
The wonderful film The Name of the Rose with Sean Connery.
Yes, yeah. Okay.
Christian Slater.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So that's novel.
My era.
That's Umberto Eco. It's his most famous book. Amazing. So Eco grows up. He's like an 11-year-old when Mussolini comes to power. And funnily, Eco won his first writing award when he was an 11-year-old. They had a whole bunch of school kids under Mussolini had to write an essay saying why I would live and die for Mussolini. Okay. And Eco, being just a genius child, wrote this essay and won a prize, for being, he wrote ironically, he wrote an essay in praise of fascism as an 11-year-old. And then he matures and becomes this incredible intellect, this incredible artist. And eventually he wrote this wonderful essay in 1995 called Eternal Fascism. And this is a little piece from that I think is kind of beautiful. He talks about Eurofascism, which is like neo-fascism, I guess, new fascism. Mm-hmm. He says, Eurofascism is still around us, sometimes in plain clothes. It would be so much easier for us if they appeared on the world scene, somebody saying, I want to reopen Auschwitz. I want the black shirts to parade again in the Italian squares. Unfortunately, life is not that simple. Eurofascism can come back under the most innocent of disguises. Our duty is to uncover it and to point our finger at it and in all of its new instances, every day, in every part of the world. Franklin Roosevelt's words on November 4th, 1938, are worth recalling. If American democracy ceases to move forward as a living force, seeking day and night by peaceful means to better the lot of its citizens, fascism will grow in strength in our land. Freedom and liberation are an unending task.
Wow. So for me, it keeps coming back to complacency and ignorance.
Yeah.
So,
And
you've
got to know your history.
Yes.
To start with.
Yeah. And conscious thinking.
Yeah.
In the words you say, in the actions you take. And I feel like there is a lot of unconscious thinking and also unconscious ignorance, which I'm probably responsible for myself, you know.
You know, this is the heart of it. You can't be a contemporary, conscious man or woman of the world if you don't know your history. You're a child. You've got to know your history. And look, the hard work's been done for us. The heavy lifting has been done by these incredible intellectuals, starting with the Enlightenment. You know, starting in France in the 1700s and exploding the works of Rousseau and leading to the poets of negritude. And this explosion of intellectualism, struggling out of the pain and the destruction and the rape and murder of colony, the French colonies, the German colonies, the Dutch, the English, struggling from that, and Césaire and Frantz Fanon and their writing, and then the struggles of Gandhi and the struggles of Martin Luther King against repression, against racism, against colonialism, against fascism, to the work of Echo. They've done the work. All we need to do is read it.
Gotcha. And there's other means these days. There's listening to podcasts. There's listening to audio. You can listen to an audio book. Most books these days.
Get Malcolm X. Malcolm X. The biography of Malcolm X is one of the best books ever written. I knew nothing about Malcolm X apart from the film that I saw.
By Spike Lee.
Which is a fantastic bit of work. And that painted a really human portrait of a guy who I didn't know much about. I knew that he was a struggler in the movement in the 60s. But I'd sort of heard that he was a radical, that he was part of the Nation of Islam, that he was sort of tainted by this sort of like militant black power. The story is much more complicated. Here was this man who was a gangster, who grew up in poverty, who struggled his way to be a hustler and a pimp, but then found Islam and became a man of God, and then was caught in a militant side of that within black power, but then went on the Hajj to Saudi Arabia, to Mecca, and he saw white men, yellow men, red men, black men, all together under Islam, and he came back and he became a humanitarian. He exploded as a new age man, as a man who suddenly knew that the world was a big, complicated place made up of all these people who were all struggling out from colonization and from fascism. Men, women, gay, straight, everybody struggling out from the yokes of old power. And he became a man of love, and at which point he was gunned down in his prime. But get the book Malcolm X, read it, listen to it on an audio book, read Martin Luther King, read Discourse on Colonization by Césaire. These books will blow your mind.
Because most people know those names.
Yeah.
Your common person
and
would
these people were brilliant.
But I guarantee a majority of people would not be able to tell you exactly what the story is behind them, except for, I know with Martin Luther King, I mean there was the LA riots and there was the beating of Rodney King, and then I just remember the media around it. There was Martin Luther King, like, in his story was coming out during the LA riots back in early 90s, or was it late 80s? I can't exactly remember.
Early 90s, and it was a tough time for that struggle, I think, but very much so, Martin Luther King's words, and
they were being resonated and spruiked a lot
to try and reconnect people with a humanism as opposed to a militant, segregated racism, and be that black, white, yellow, whatever the racism is we're talking about. So, all of this great stuff is out there for us to stand on its shoulders. And when you read some of these incredible men and women who have done the heavy lifting for us, it just lights a fire in your heart and in your mind, and you see the genius of our species, the beauty. And we kind of need that now, because there's a lot of darkness. That list of names I gave you of these right-wing leaders who are stripping rights away from people as we speak, hand over fist, with no respect. I mean, you see a senator in Australia, overtly disrespecting the oldest living culture on earth, with no respect, with no understanding.
I'm sorry, but in a country that has an identity problem, I mean, this is my opinion. I've always felt that Australia has an identity problem.
Yeah, of course. If you don't lock it into an Aboriginal beginning point, you're going to have an identity problem.
And fundamentally, that's where I have always struggled, is that what a beautiful thing for a country to identify with.
Absolutely.
I kind of feel like New Zealand, our neighbours, have done it much better than us.
Oh, yeah.
They identify with Maori culture so beautifully. And I'm obviously not perfect like most of us. But I just feel like Australia has always had a lot to learn from New Zealand in that respect. And and that's where when I think about Australia's situation and the treatment of our Indigenous elders and population, it just doesn't compute with me, because it's, like you said, it's one of the oldest living cultures, something to be so proud of. One
of the great surviving cultures on earth, who've struggled for, upwards of 60, 70,000 years in a tough country.
And we talk about sustainability. They're storytellers. They're artists. They're farmers.
They are.
I don't know.
I'd recommend anyone who's interested in sort of starting to dig into that to read the two books I'll mention. One is by Bill Stanner, W.H. Stanner. Stanner was the first great, I guess, post-colonial Australian anthropologist from the 30s, 40s, 50s and 60s. So read the essays by Bill Stanner, William Stanner, online. He was the first sort of white man to really comprehend, to really get in under the skin, and to lift up the genius of Aboriginal culture, of its art, philosophy. And then I would go to Dark Emu, this wonderful book that was released only a couple of years ago, and it's a contemporary history, well, in contemporary in as far as it's just been released a few years ago, and it reinterprets what Aboriginal culture was. Aboriginal culture was not a hunter-gatherer aimlessly wandering around with his dilly bag and bundle of spears. It was a complicated, multifaceted, high culture, a sort of an aristocratic egalitarianism. And what Bruce paints in Dark Emu is the oldest agricultural culture on earth, way older than the so-called Levant, which is the Middle East, which is sort of placed somewhere around 10, 15,000 years ago. This agricultural culture in Australia is tens and tens of thousands of years old. They were growing and harvesting seed crops. They had the enormous fish farms and eel farms, aquaculture, on a huge scale for tens and tens of thousands of years. And all of this was hidden from us so we could demonize and dispossess, exactly as the English had done in India and in America.
Yeah, going back to the agricultural thing, I mean, it could really be, I feel like it is described as permaculture, which is they actually were doing permanent culture. So
Yeah.
they were working in cyclic systems as opposed to modern day agriculture, where it's often a monoculture, where they take from the land, obtain a yield, and then don't actually put back into the land to regenerate and build the soil and stuff like that. Whereas I think the Aboriginals, from what I understand, were working with the seasons, with the environment, and using to put the environment and the outputs to put back in, as opposed to take.
Yeah, that's right.
And I mean, what a journey you've taken us on today. I mean, you were just talking about education and awareness and conscious thinking. I feel like what you've just done for us in the last hour is actually, you're starting to hopefully inspire some thoughts, inspire some conscious decision making. But what would be some other take-home messages that you'd like to give today?
Well, thanks for humouring me with this little journey, because I sort of put it together for you, because I wanted to. I didn't want to talk about the stuff that I'd done and or films that I'd made in too much detail.
Why is that?
Just because the films speak for themselves, and people can see my stuff at the House of Red Monkey YouTube channel. If you type in the House of Red Monkey, you can see a bunch of links to a bunch of my films. That stuff sort of speaks for itself.
Gotcha.
And I love it, and I'm proud of the work, and I stand by the work. But this is sort of, I guess this is, for me, a culmination of my fascination with history, of the cross-cultural experience, and of colonialism, growing up in a colonial country, in a post-colonial country, coming here to Indonesia, this great colonial, post-colonial country. And Indonesia finds itself in a neo-colonial situation with a sort of a Javanese-centric empire spread out over 200 different minority cultures and engulfing them under a colonial language of Bahasa Indonesia. So this stuff's really relevant to me. But I just wanted to bring this thread, this connectivity between the old and the new. There's nothing new under the sun. This stuff is interconnected from the past to the future. My passion is to know your past in order to own the now and to be able to move into the future with some positive energy. That's why I wanted to sort of try and weave these threads together today.
I love that, man. I love that so much. And I was thinking that as you were saying, it's like, to know where you're going, you have to know where you've been. I think that really resonated with me the most.
Yeah.
And then you're talking about this country, Indonesia, which is a just diverse mosaic of culture and language and practices. And I don't think I asked you this at the start. Like, why Indonesia for you? I know, I sort of know, we talked about this off record, how you first came to Indonesia 30 years ago. Yeah,
well, I was an exchange student here.
Yep.
And back in the mid-'80s, I just finished high school. And I applied to go on a cultural exchange program because my sister had done one, and I was sort of super competitive with my sister, Frances, my delightful sister. And but I applied to go to Greece, Italy, France, and Spain, being the sort of little Eurocentric knob that I was. And they said, "You're going to Indonesia," and I said, "Indo where?"
No way.
Indo where? They said, "That's where Bali is." Oh, Bali, that sounds all right. No, they didn't send me to Bali. They sent me to Central Java, to this hot industrial city called Semarang in Central Java. Right. And it was a total blessing. I mean, I was way out of my depth. I couldn't speak the language, didn't know the culture. The only thing I could say was gosok gigi, which means brush your teeth. I had nothing. And I sort of went from being a big fish in a small pond to being way out of my depth. But it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me, because I became a minority for the first time. And I suddenly understood what it was to be a minority. And it was difficult. I couldn't speak the language, and I didn't know what was going on. I was just sweating profusely in this tropical land. And luckily, I'd been hosted by this beautiful family, the Soweto family in Central Java, and they were incredibly cultural. And they taught me about Javanese history, and they taught me about the Javanese culture and the wayang and the Hindu history of the Majapahit Empire and the Hindu roots of Central Java, of the shadow puppets, the wayang kulit. and of the great temples of Prambanan, the Hindu temple, and of Borobudur, the great Buddhist temple, and these waves and waves of colonial cultural history that make up the layer cake of Indonesia. And I love these people, and I started this love affair with Indonesia, and I've since taken my kids to meet their Javanese grandparents.
Amazing.
Which is just beautiful. It wasn't a dry eye in the house. You know?
Wow, man.
Because my Indonesian mother, I didn't have kids until I was 40. My Indonesian mother, for 20 years, was saying, "When are you going to bring me a baby? When are you going to bring me a little godson?" I was like, "Yeah, take your time. Man's got to see the world first." So I have this intimate connection with the place. And it's a love-hate relationship. I love so many, like I have with Australia. I love so many aspects of this wonderful country, and then I hate a whole bunch of aspects of this country. So yeah, that's been a really impacting thread to my life.
Yeah, I love what you just said about you first experienced what it was like to be in a minority.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I've only been living in Bali full time for a year. Have been travelling back and forth for numerous years for holidays, like a lot of Australians. I like to surf and all that kind of stuff. And what goes through my mind quite regularly is the tolerance that the Balinese people, and I've been to Java a few times, the tolerance they have for foreigners. And then I draw a comparison compared to Australia's tolerance for migrants and foreigners. And like a basic example is that I can't speak Bahasa Indonesian. I'm taking lessons and I'm improving, but the local people completely tolerate my lack of language skills. Now, in Australia, if you can't speak English, people just won't give you the time of day. I feel like there's a distinct lack of tolerance. I haven't experienced the love and tolerance that these people show. I feel like that's been one key lesson for me, being now a minority in a foreign country.
Yeah, it's very sobering.
And I really want to take that back. I've always felt a deep empathy for our Indigenous culture, and I felt very a strong sense of conviction to speak up, in semi-public forums about the treatment of our migrants and refugees, and that hurt. I felt saddened by the treatment,
Because we're all refugees. If you're not Aboriginal, you're a refugee.
And that's how exactly.
Or a refugee, you're an immigrant. Let's put it that way.
And to me, it's that simple.
Yeah, it is that simple.
And I do struggle with people that can't accept or understand that.
It's just ignorant. I mean, it just shows that you don't know your history. You don't know where you're living. Exactly.
And I struggle with those people, and then I inquire about their source of information. And this is intolerance on my part, but when they say that they're getting their news from mainstream media in Australia and they're basing their opinions on that, it's very hard for me to swallow.
Yeah. And it's not that all.
Do you agree?
It's not that all media are evil or right wing in Australia. There's a multifaceted experience and landscape there of media. But I mean, you need to check your sources. I mean, you need to get your information from you can't get it from one place. You need to get it from lots of different places. And it's media and history and culture is political, and history is written by the victor. And you need to reach out and find the truth by having numerous sources.
Exactly, and just even on a personal level, adopting a growth mindset.
Sure.
And accepting that maybe your views and perspective and opinions are not entirely correct, and accepting the views and perspectives of others. And I feel like that is a fundamental human way to be empathetic.
It's tough because, you got to be empathetic, you got to listen, and you need to listen to people, but you got to push back. When people are speaking bullshit, when people are speaking hate, you got to push back. You can't just accept that every view is valid. It ain't the case. You can have an opinion, but that doesn't make you an expert, and it certainly doesn't mean you're right.
I agree. And when did you... I mean, you seem to me as someone who has quite a deep interest in politics, obviously.
I try to switch off as much as I can because I find it so depressing.
Overwhelming?
Well, just overwhelming with sadness, overwhelming with stupidity. Following Australian politics or European or American politics is really, really tiring, and it just goes round and round and round, and these peanuts just talk about the same shit year after year after year. I'd much rather delve into the culture, the philosophy, the history, to inform me. And yeah, you got to pop your head up every now and then and take in the lie of the land within the political landscape and know what's going on, so that you're not completely in the dark. But the truth is that that sort of the central debate is kind of unchanging in a depressing way. So I find it difficult to keep up with it, and I certainly have sort of pulled back from reading as much political sort of current affairs as I used to as a younger guy.
Yeah, and but when did that interest and passion really start for you? How old were you? Was it during high school or was it university?
I remember being a young man and just thinking, this is hopeless. There's absolutely no way I can ever understand what's going on in this world. But because it's just so much to learn, it seems overwhelming as a young person. Like, how could I possibly comprehend? The truth is, you just get reading, get out in the world, travel the world, see the world, and then just read like a beast. Just read and read and read. And you know what? You can learn about just about anything if you knock off 3 or 4 of the best books written, the seminal texts within that discipline. You can go from being a complete ignoramus to having an idea in the space of a couple of weeks. It is remarkable.
And you believe history's the key?
Yeah. History, philosophy, culture, music, art, all of these things are super impacting.
Speaking of music, you've given me a hip hop song.
Yep,
correct?
That's a hip hop song of the Pauline Hanson poem that got played around many years ago when I recorded it. I recorded it with a band called Birdwave, who went on to play with George Warumbu, the lead singer of Warumpi Band.
Yep.
During the last years of his glorious life.
Yep.
And I've also given you a song by Us Mob, who were the first black politics band in Australia. So maybe you can slip them into the podcast somewhere.
Let's play one now.
Awesome.
Which one would you prefer to play first?
Well, why don't you play Us Mob? It's a song called Genocide, which is pretty subtle.
Okay. That word. All right, let's play it.
They promised us this, and they promised us that, but all we ever get is a stab in the back. They tell us what to do, and then they push us around, and then they have the goal to go and rip off the ground. When are they gonna learn? When will they stop? When are they gonna learn to stop this genocide? Like the children that are dying, the white man just ain't trying. He's cheating and he's lying all the time. They don't want to understand, but they killed us for our land. Just for the earth and sand, they're putting money in their greedy hands. When are they gonna learn? When will they stop? When are they gonna learn to stop this genocide? ever get is a stab in the back. They tell us what to do, and they push us around, and then they have to go and rip off the ground. When are they gonna learn? When will they stop? When are they gonna learn to stop this genocide?
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. So as you can
Thanks for
see,
sharing that. Yeah,
Pleasure.
And what's your analysis of that song?
so that I knew nothing about black struggle music as a young guy. Like I said, I grew up in Adelaide in South Australia. I didn't meet an Aboriginal person until I was at university. I knew nothing about Australian history. South Australian history was very whitewashed. I come from an old colonial white family in the Barossa Valley, one of the oldest winemaking families in the country.
Wow.
And yet I knew nothing about the land in which I grew up, the Paramonkey people who had been displaced from the land that I grew and my family became rich on. And so I went to university, I started to learn, I met my first Aboriginal people, I made some Aboriginal friends, but then I struck out into the bush and went to my first Aboriginal community and a second community and third community, and I had friends who were working, and I started building connections, putting it together, started reading what had been written in Australian history, The Other Side of the Frontier, Stanner, the other great sort of modern historians who started to unravel and unpick and tear apart the great sort of the great Australian silence, as Stanner called it, this sort of fabricated whitewashing of our history. And fell in love. I've always loved the Australian bush, and then I started to learn about the genius of Aboriginal culture and saw how brilliantly they live with the land, their knowledge of the land, developed a love for that. And one of the last doco I made, which is called Motorkite Dreaming, which I made for Redbull,
Right.
which is a story of two crazy white dudes from Adelaide flying little microlights across Australia from the Coorong in South Australia, across 5 deserts to Broome in Western Australia. And as they do that, they go across 20 Aboriginal language nations. So it was kind of I made this specifically as a Trojan horse narrative. I wanted to make an adventure story that would bring Middle Australia into an Aboriginal place where they might not normally go. And I had to go to Redbull in Austria to get the money to make this quintessential Australian film. Because Australia still has the tall poppy syndrome. We're still very unsure of ourselves. We're still very unsure of Aboriginal culture. We feel this sort of PC tight grip. We can't speak about it if we're not Aboriginal. We can't engage in it if we're not experts on it. So I made this film, and to do that film, I had to work with Aboriginal elders to guide me because I know nothing about Aboriginal nations. So an old friend of mine, a musician called Carol Carpeney, who I'd worked with before, we'd produced a couple of theatre shows together, and we'd sat around drinking beers and singing songs on his guitar on road trips to Darwin a couple of times, and we're great mates. And he's a very cultural man. He's a Nuttinjeri man from the south of South Australia. And he and his best mate, Bart Sainsbury, who's a Narungga man, came on as our Indigenous protocols experts and our guides into this Aboriginal world for Motorkite Dreaming. And so to do this, to make the film, we engaged in a 4-week protocols exercise whereby we drove the whole route of the proposed film that we were going to shoot the next year. And we stopped in each of these 20 Aboriginal language nations. And Carol and Bart introduced us to the elders, and we sat down and we asked permission to be there, and then we asked permission to come back the next year and make the film. And this is simple Indigenous cross-cultural protocol, sign of respect, which was massively lacking in filmmaking and anthropology and all aspects of interaction of white-black culture in Australia. So we really worked hard on getting these protocols and having permission. In some places they said no. We've had a series of suicides on our land. We don't want any more focus on our land. We'd prefer if you didn't film here. So we changed our route. We said, fine, no worries. It's your country.
Yeah.
So we changed our route. And the next year, the two crazy young white dudes in their microlight aircraft. Microlights are like... it's like a lawnmower with a hang glider attached to it.
Ones. Those things terrify me, mate. I've seen them. I always think you'll never get me near one of those things.
They are sensational. Very, very dangerous. And these idiots almost killed themselves about 1,000 times. And so we shot the film. It was a great success. Your listeners can watch it at redbull.tv. It's called Motorkite Dreaming. There's 5 episodes. And there's a feature film also as well, which you can see the link to on my YouTube channel. So Carol, this Indigenous protocols guy, this is a long way of telling it,
it's fine.
Short story long.
Be long.
Carol was lead guitarist in Us Mob, the song we just heard.
Excellent.
He was instigating member in the first Aboriginal black politics band.
Right.
Came out of Adelaide, 1979. Yep. 1979, Adelaide University started a music school for Indigenous musicians, and they came down off the missions. This was the time when the missions were falling apart and people were allowed to travel for the first time.
Gotcha.
And so these young men, 18-year-old, they came down. Bart Willoughby came there, Carol Carpeney. Carol formed Us Mob. Bart Willoughby formed Wrong Side of the Road. Formed No Fixed Address.
Gotcha.
And those two bands were involved in a documentary called Wrong Side of the Road, which people can watch as well. And that started Aboriginal rock and roll. And they played guitars like beasts. And as you heard in that song, it's a big rockin' sound. And that music led to Warumpi, and it led to Yotha Yundi, and it led to the great Aboriginal artists of today. So that's Carol Carpeney. He's a legendary man, still a great mate of mine, and he's actually doing protocols on a new film that I'm shooting in Melbourne in January.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to share a little bit of information about that, or you?
It's called Boxing Molly.
Okay.
And it's a short film as a precursor to a feature. It's the story of a white woman and a black man who are secretly married. And it takes place in a boxing tent, which was a very popular form of entertainment back in the day.
Yep.
Where white guys could get up and go toe-to-toe with black boxers. You'd pay a couple of bucks and get a chance to punch a black dude.
It's quite common in Outback Australia.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The boxing tents. And there's still a couple going.
Is there?
Yeah. So this is set in 1901 in Melbourne at the time of Federation, when the White Australia policy is being enacted.
Gotcha.
And this is a love story between a black guy and a white woman who are secretly married and have kids, who have mixed race kids.
Right.
And the White Australia policy is just enacted. And she's concocting a plan to rescue them from their predicament. So it's a film about racism, it's a film about white Australia, it's a film about love, and it's a film about boxing. And my beautiful partner, Cindy, who's an actor, is playing the part of Boxing Molly.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I want to make this short, make it funky, make it awesome, make it super gritty and enticing, and then use that to build impetus to write the feature script to make the feature film, which will kind of be like a slightly more dour Australian version of Django Unchained.
Oh, really?
Like a big, ballsy, nasty, historical redemption story of love over mongrels who try to butcher people. In your face. Full of music, full of life.
Are we talking independent films? Or
look, I mean, we'll always be somewhat independent, but look, I'm making a film next year in Papua New Guinea, which will be my biggest film. Motorkite Dreaming was a sort of a $1 million TV series, but this next film will be twice that. And then I hope to go on. And obviously, you need lots of partners, lots of money.
Yes.
Independent voice, absolutely. Partnerships, absolutely.
As an artist, though, Are you in a lot of discussions around maintaining your creative integrity when it comes to funding for films?
It's never been a big deal because I've mainly got my money for my docos from SBS and ABC, which are the more independent television stations in Australia. I have felt the crush of external voices, and when you get money from South Australian Film Fund or Screen West or New South Wales Film Corporation, they will put a producer to work with you, and those people, they have opinions, and some of them want their fingerprints on the story.
I was going to say, do hidden agendas start to emerge?
Usually not so much with ABC and SBS. They're fantastic institutions. They've been crushed by the Conservative governments in terms of funding in Australia, but they are terrific institutions. And I've not had a lot of pressure. When I worked with Redbull to make Motorkite Dreaming, it was a German producer who came across, Wolfgang, and Wolfie was fantastic. He loved Aboriginal culture, and he gave me huge leeway to express the voices of Aboriginal culture that we came across and that we managed to squeeze into the film. So I've been really lucky.
Now that you have such an established reputation, do you feel that leeway is becoming greater? Or is it becoming...
I don't know how established it is.
I think it's established.
I still feel like I'm sort of building something. And I think Strange Birds and Motorkite Dreaming and the film I'm making in Papua New Guinea next year, Jungle of Ghosts, all of these films are helping me get to a place where I can build the partnerships and get the resources to make big Aussie films. That's what I'm interested in doing, is making big Aussie ballsy films that are not shy, that are full of heart and full of life, but also full of the dark side of our story.
I feel like a lot of Australian films do that so well, what you just described.
Yeah, well, it's what we need to do. We need to move outside of the sort of the backyard barbecue and the kitchen sink drama, and appreciate that our history and our stories were the Wild West. I mean, America was called the Wild West, but that was settled by puritanicals. I mean, Australia was settled by outrageous colonial pirates. And so the Australian history is the Wild West. I mean, it is bloody and dark, and some of it's beautiful, and some of it's inspiring and uplifting. But it is a multi-faceted tapestry of love and hate. You got
a lot to work with.
You got a big palette right there.
That's amazing. I've got to delve into. Would you consider yourself a poet?
I was a poet for a little while. Actually,
for Triple J?
I was a poet on Triple J.
What was that gig about?
I don't know what I was doing because poets poets have a higher rate of suicide than airline pilots. It's
really
tragic. Yeah,
I thought dentиsts were the main.
Dentists, yeah, well, they got the good drugs, haven't they?
I'm not laughing at that. I'm just laughing at the context.
Well, it's laughing gas. Yeah, it's in the air. Yeah, so I wrote a lot of poems. I wrote a lot of poems back in the day.
And you had like a weekly segment where you'd...
I did, yeah. I used to go in there and do these poems. And they were sort of political. I had poems about East Timor. I had poems about a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And the Pauline Hanson poem comes out of that. And but I've moved away from that. So now I still read a lot of poetry. And I like to read poetry before I'm going to write something, I don't want to read someone else's writing on a topic just before I write, like a script or something. I want to read beautiful transcendental language and then go and write a script, because that transcendental stuff that's the gold.
Yeah.
That's why poetry is so powerful, is because it's free form language that allows you to transcend, to go to that place, because like the Buddhists and the Hindus perceive that reality is not just these five senses. It's something imperceivable. So if you can use language to transform between reality and dream and solid and liquid, that's the magic. It's the alchemy of art, really, for me.
The alchemy of art.
Right there, mate.
Mate, I love that. I almost feel like it's a good way to end on the alchemy of art. But I will ask you one final question. What would be your take-home message right from today or in general? What would you like to depart our conversation
Well, just
with?
sort of tying it up, I want to say thanks, Shannon, for having me. It's been a pleasure sitting here in the jungle.
It is. It's awesome, isn't it?
Great spot.
You know, we had an earth tremor just before.
Was that a tremor?
You were telling a story, and I felt it. That's why I was like looking around, but I was like, I don't want to interrupt his story. Who cares if we're having an earthquake?
Because normally when you're on radio with someone and they start looking around, it's normally because there's like excess noise, like an aeroplane going over.
Yeah.
But here in Indonesia, of course, it's an earthquake.
Yeah, it's an earthquake. And then my next thought was, I am in easily the safest structure you could ever be in for an earthquake. It's
full
built from
bamboo
structure.
Yeah.
The whole thing will just sway.
And it did.
I was in one a couple of months ago in the heart of school. I was up the very top. And it just swayed back and forth, and books fell off the table. But I didn't feel unsafe for a second.
Yeah.
I knew there wasn't going to be any bricks landing on my head or anything like that.
Well, that's a first for me, man. Being on air as as the earth is shaking.
We just rolled with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you'd like to what's your take home message? Like,
just to tie up this whole little meandering river to bring it home to the sea, I'd say read your history. We're not children anymore. We can handle the truth. So get the truth and it will set you free.
It's so true. I mean, you've taken us on such a journey, and for me, it's been a profound pleasure to listen to you speak. You speak so well, so concise, and so inspired. And the passion seems very, very real. And you seem, to me, to be someone who is more motivated than ever.
No doubt.
And thank you for that, and thank you for your inspiration. I'm going to walk away from this conversation completely inspired and educated. And I just want to thank you for your time. I think recording a podcast, I mean, it's been epic. It's been an hour and 44 minutes.
That's plenty.
And I, like I said, thank you for that time commitment. I know you're a busy man, and I really look forward to following more of your work. And where else can people maybe get in touch with you, or maybe listen? I mean, you mentioned you have a YouTube channel.
Yeah, so I mean, just go to the House of Red Monkey on YouTube.
Yep.
I'm a bit of a Luddite, so I've sort of only come to social media. I've been dragged kicking and screaming. But I love it. I've just got a bunch of stuff up there. You can contact me through there. You can check out motorkitedreaming.com. You can check out strangebirdsinparadise.com. Drop me a line especially if you're ever in Melbourne or South Australia or here in Bali.
All right, brother. We'll leave it there. High five, man.
Yeah.
Let's go grab some lunch.
Beautiful. Thanks, Shannon.
All right. See you, mate. Thank you.